The Rainbow was the only American division that had a part in that change. The German military machine was a formidable one, and one of the best in the world. Their army was well trained, well disciplined, and well equipped, requiring the armies of many nations to defeat it: France, England, Canada, Australia, Italy, New Zealand, and the United States. Had it not been for the manpower of the United States, Germany would probably have won the war. I've covered only a few of the events that occurred on this front, and I might say that no historian has ever been able to cover them all. I do know that the rear of any front is the worst place to be during combat. The enemy tries to wipe out everything and anything by constant bombardment. He wants to destroy the reserve troops and his supplies. He seeks the location of big guns and ammunition dumps. He concentrates much of his firepower on bridgeheads and crossroads in order to bottle up traffic, and tries to destroy all moving things. Our casualties among frontline troops and those of the rear was about equally divided. It was the duty of the military police to keep all traffic moving. To be stationed at bridgeheads and crossroads was a duty that none of them wanted. It was at these places where the military police lost most of their men. I could go on and tell you about the other engagements by my division, but most would be a repetition of what I have already told you. I can tell you that the Rainbow was the only American division that had a major part in every battle that was fought during 1918. I can tell you that the normal strength of the division was 27,000 men, and that we had over 45,000 replacements. The 41st Division was organized to fight in France too, but they never got that chance because we were constantly drawing men from their ranks to fill our own. After we had gotten the Germans out of the trenches, we kept them on the run until the war ended. It was on my birthday when the Rainbow relieved the 1st and 2nd Divisions at Chateau Thierry. The 5th and 6th Marine regiments were part of the 2nd Division. These two divisions had not gained too much territory, but fought like hell to hold what they had gained. Nevertheless, some of our hardest fighting was on this front, but the Rainbow carried the lines many miles further. We were relieved from this area sometime in late August or early September and moved to the Argonne front, where we continued to advance till the armistice was signed on November 11, 1918. Shortly after the armistice, the division hiked to the Rhine River, where we stood guard till ships home. The British guarded the bridgehead at Cologne, the Canadians at Bonn, and the Americans at the bridges of Remagen and Cogblin. The French were further up the Rhine River. My outfit was stationed at Ahrweiler, Germany, which was just a few miles up the Ahr River from Cogblin. We were finally shipped back to Brest, France, where we boarded ship for America. It was during our stay at Ahrweiler when Brother Bill and I got a 20-day pass to visit our kinfolks in Scotland, in Glasgow, Scotland. As I have previously stated, it would be impossible for me to relate all my experiences while in France and Germany. But if you're still interested in the exploits of my division, I will gladly lend you the history of my division that tells you about all our engagement. but even the book will not cover everything. But maybe I can relate at random some of the minor things that occurred concerning some of the men and myself. Some may sound funny, but I can assure you that most were quite grave. It seemed to me that every time our medical department detachment was moved from one place to the other, we always wound up near a crossroad or a bridgehead. But I suppose it was planned that way. And it was at these places where most of the men who operated in the rear were either killed or wounded. Most people don't realize it, but it required 7 men in the rear to support 1 man at the front. Therefore, the reason why the rear has always received the heaviest concentration of artillery fire and bombing from the air. When I speak about the rear, I'm talking about that area that is within a few hundred yards of the front to 2 miles to the rear. All this is the area in which the enemy is most interested, because if the supply bases are destroyed, there can be no offensive, and many a battle has been lost because the men at the front could not be re-equipped with the necessities for combat. I cannot remember on which front most of these incidents occurred, but I will tell you about some of them. We had a little Jew by the name of Hyman Rose, who had come to our medical department detachment as a replacement, and who had come to America from Poland just a few years before we started or got into the war. He was about 5 feet tall and spoke in broken English. One night while we were stationed near one of the crossroads, several enemy planes came over on their bombing mission and had picked out our spot as their target. We had policed the ground we had occupied that day, and had set the stuff on fire, hoping that it would be burned out before nightfall. But when the planes came over, there were still a few sparks remaining in the fire. Any kind of light at night is clearly visible from the air. So in a joking way, Brother Bill told Rose to pee on the fire to put it out. He was trembling and scared, and said to Brother Bill, "Sergeants, I cannot do nothing. I cannot even pee." Then there was a time when we were stationed on a few hundred yards from a bridge that crossed the canal. The bridge was only about 50, 60 feet long, but must have been important to the enemy, because he was out to destroy it. The first wave of planes missed the bridge entirely, but had wounded several men. One was direct across the canal from our first aid station. Curtis Davis and I were ordered to go pick him up. We had to cross that bridge to get to him, but we made the trip okay. We were back at the first aid station no more than a few minutes when 2 planes came over and made a direct hit on the bridge, blowing it to smithereens. If we had been just a few minutes later and going after the man, we would have been smack dab in the center of that bridge. At another time, I was in a poker game with a bunch of the fellas when the captain of the military police came by and asked for a volunteer to help direct traffic at a nearby crossroad. But there were no volunteers. I had been playing with a fellow named Cleary, who owed me 50 francs, and the captain chose him. He told me as he left they would pay me if he got back, but if he didn't, that I would be out of luck. Well, I was out of luck because he never got back. The crossroad was under heavy fire, and he jumped behind a small tree for protection. But the tree wasn't large enough to cover his entire body, and he was littered with shrapnel from head to foot. If he had had sense enough to hit a ditch, he might be around today to tell about it. The irony of the thing is that I was one of the detail that was chosen to bury him. The night we moved into Belleau Wood on the Chateau Tierfront, it was raining like hell and so dark you could barely see where you were going. The 5th and 6th Marines had fought through those woods just a few days before, and some of their dead were buried in the wood. But being so dark, we couldn't know about it. My division had moved into that front sector to relieve the 1st and 2nd Divisions. And as I say, it was on my birthday. Anyway, I put a stretcher under my cot to get out of the rain, to sleep. When I woke the next morning, there was a hand protruding from the ground no more than a few inches from my head. Someone hadn't done a very good job in burying that guy. I tossed some dirt over the hand before we moved forward. One evening on the Argonne front, we were lined up for mess when a German plane dived out of the clouds for an observation balloon that was stationed nearby, and his machine gun bullets were flying everywhere. He made several hits on the balloon, setting it on fire, but the observer parachuted to safety. One of his bullets went through the mess kit of the fellow who was standing in line in front of me. The attack was so sudden that we didn't have time to scatter. Normally the planes take running shots at any troops that may be close, but lucky for us, this time it didn't. When near the front, we always get our meals from a rolling field kitchen. My brother and I were on a 2-day pass to Paris when the planes came over on the first night to bomb the city. I suppose the population of Paris took the bombing in stride and were accustomed to it, but there were a few American soldiers who were scared blue, possibly because they had never seen any actual combat and were running around like a bunch of scared sheep, wanting to know what to do or where to go. We told them to remain right where they were, so they were just as safe in one place or another. Strange how some soldiers can act at a time like that. Once there was a soldier lying on the battlefield with his leg shot off when a first aid man passed by. He begged the first aid man to take him to the hospital because his leg was shot off and he was bleeding to death. The first aid man threw the soldier's body across his shoulder and started for the first aid station. They hadn't gone very far when a shell exploded to the rear, decapitating the wounded man. Not having received any wounds himself, the first aid man didn't know about that. When he got to the first aid station, he told the sergeant in charge to fix the man up because he was in bad shape. I say he's in bad shape, he replied. He got his head shot off. And as I say, the first aid man didn't know anything about this. So he threw the wounded man's body to the floor and said, "Why, the dirty, lying SOB. He told me it was his leg." One day a bunch of us guys decided to take a stroll out into no man's land to look for souvenirs and war relics. The day was calm and beautiful, and not a sound of war anywhere. French troops were stationed in the lines at this point. We had ridden up to the lines on horseback, but the French stopped us. We emerged from a patch of wood. They told us that we couldn't go any further because the German line were no more than a few hundred yards ahead. We told them that we would go on anyway, that they couldn't stop us. But they made us tie the horses in the wood. There were 8 or 10 of us in the group, and we had picked up several articles when suddenly we saw a flash from the enemy line, and in a second or two we saw a shell explode nearby. One of the fellows said, "Oh, that's just a stray shell. Let's keep looking." Shortly we saw this flash again. The next shell cut the branches from a tree which was very close to us. "Stray hell, your titty. The Krauts are shooting at us." The third shell was still closer. We didn't stop to meditate, so we scattered and made a beeline back to the woods. After we had scattered, the firing stopped. That must have been quite a sight for the French troops, because we were laughing like hell when we got back to the woods. That cured us of many more scouting in places where we had no business in the first place. That's enough about the war, so let's talk about something a little more pleasant. I think I told you that my brother Bill and I had applied for a 20-day pass to visit our kinfolks in Scotland who we had never seen. Well, the pass was granted, and we prepared for the trip. This was after the war, and we were stationed at Aarweiler, Germany. We had planned to cross the English Channel from Calais, France,